So all the way back since 1.6, there hasn't been much updates to Klee's strongest teams and gear. If you're someone who plays optimal teams, then you've probably been playing the same monopyro team with Kazuha, with the same weapon and same artifacts since launch. And a lot of Klee players have been asking for a cryo Xiangling, hydro Xiangling, or even just a 5-star Xiangling for years, but nothing actually came out. However, this update is finally rewarding Klee players with a lot of new things. I'm sure you've seen on my channel or other people's channels a lot of gameplay videos already, but I don't think there's been many guides of it yet. So I'm sure many of you Klee players are still unsure of why exactly the team works or even how to play it well. So first of all, we can cover the team synergy. Furina is a really exciting character, and I'm sure many of you know already, so I don't need to go into it too much. She really benefits from team-wide healers like Jean. You might have the initial thought to gravitate to one of these team-wide healers, like for example Klee, Furina, Jean, and then a fourth character, and this would be cool, especially finally being able to play Jean and Klee together for lore reasons. However, even though Furina is easier to play with team-wide healers, a lot of the hardcore Klee players will know that the real team that you do want to play is Klee, Furina, Bennett, and Kazuha. Even though you might think that Bennett doesn't fit with Furina well, he does here. I've covered Bennett Furina synergies and playstyles in my previous video, so unless you're finding it harder to survive, then you really do want to play Bennett here. He just provides much more damage than other options. One of the main reasons Bennett works so well is his synergy with Kazuha, and this doesn't disappear just because you're playing Furina. Bennett and Kazuha together make it very simple to buff both Pyro and Hydro. You might know this as the double swirl techniques, which I'll get into later. Whether you're playing them with Child, Yelan, or Xingqiu, generally a setup like using your Hydro, Bennett's Burst, and then either using Kazuha's Burst or Skill. That's just been the go-to setup for a variety of vaporize teams for a long time. And the good thing, which I'll go into later too, is that you can be very flexible with these setups as well. And if you're smart, you're able to get extra healing in there too. So I know a lot of people are wondering, how much stronger is this new team compared to the old Monopyro team? And whilst the old Monopyro team has a lot of synergy and the combined damage of Klee and Xiangling is very good, you could say the same thing for Klee and Furina's damage too. And aside from the team's energy generation requirements being a bit more stressful compared to a team with 3 pyros, this team with Furina actually has a lot of similar synergies that you get with the monopyro team. So going back to Bennett, if you've played this team a lot, one of the downsides with the monopyro team was that the setups can be quite long. You have to basically bring Kazuha on twice in a setup. The first time to buff Xiangling and the second time to refresh buffs for Klee. This is because Xiangling snapshots her buffs, so Kazuha has to swirl before Xiangling uses her abilities, and then shortly after you do want to bring Kazuha on again in order to refresh before you start Klee's damage window. There's also extra benefits like the suction helping with Klee's mines. Of course, this team did not have a strict setup at all, and there were a lot of variations for sure, but this definitely wasn't ideal, especially because the more time you spend setting up, you're probably eating into Bennett's buff duration too. And ultimately what that meant is generally you only used to get about 4 or 5 Klee charge attacks in Bennett's buff circle, as well as shorter field time for Klee also means you get less of her burst hits. And in comparison, Furina has long duration on her abilities and she doesn't snapshot her damage. She is dynamic with how she engages with team buffs. So you start a setup using her abilities and then she can be buffed after that. And then Kazuha can come in and double buff Klee and Furina at the same time, which allows for faster setups. And importantly, you use up a lot less of Bennett's burst, giving Klee the potential to fully maximize her damage window. So what that can mean is, for example, if you do have the stamina available and fighting an enemy with enough HP, you can go from 4 to 5 charge attacks in the monopyro team to potentially up to even 7 charge attacks, as long as you have the stamina for that, and letting the burst hit its full duration of 6 waves of damage. as well as just the idea of Klee potentially having a longer damage window. As you guys might know, that flexibility is very useful to pushing HP thresholds of enemies, like when you're trying to one cycle a boss. So one good synergy is the team survivability. And since you do get to spend more time on Klee, which is thanks to Klee's relatively low HP, it's even possible when you play this team for Klee to get fully healed multiple times in a damage window, and even more times if you do get hit. Since it's really easy for Bennett to fully heal Klee, that means you can benefit more from Furina's healing talent too. The more maximized Furina's skill buff is, and the bigger buffs you get from her burst too. So even in situations where Bennett's team healing is not very optimal, him healing low HP characters does still let you be very efficient with Furina. If you're worried about Klee getting hit, she does actually have quite a few invisibility frames, and she has hyper armor on some of her charge attacks. But even if you do get hit, her burst damage is still automatically firing off, which will keep the pyro on for Furina to vape. And overall, the team's process won't be completely destroyed if you miss a charge attack here and there on Klee. Another good synergy with Mono Pyro was that Xiangling's Pyronado can move around with Klee rather than being stuck to circle impact, especially when you have to move outside of Bennett's burst, or just the sheer nature of Klee's chaos where enemies are flying about all over the place. And the cool thing with Furina is that her pets move around and adjust to enemy positions too. It's very similar to Pyronado in that way, and you can argue even better than Pyronado, because even though Pyronado has quite a lot of range, Furina's pets do hit with projectiles. Another synergy that Mono Pyro has is that Xiangling and Klee are benefiting from all the same debuffs and buffs. And with Furina in that regard, I don't think I need to explain how much Klee benefits from Furina's insane buffs. I'm sure you guys know already that Furina's burst provides a lot of damage buffs to your entire team. But not only that, as you know, Furina lets characters utilize the new Marechaussee Hunter set, and we've calculated that Klee even gets somewhere from a 17 to 20% increase just from transitioning from her old sets to this new set. This is a huge damage boost even just by itself. And then in regards to how Furina benefits from the team buffs, she does get buffed by Kazuha, and whilst Furina isn't able to benefit from Bennett's buff the way Xiangling can, you actually have to look at it outside the box. And the team's pyro application, this allows Furina to vaporize many of her hits. So in a way, she actually is being buffed quite a lot. I know many players have been shocked to see their Furina, even with 4-star weapons, you've been seeing hits well over 100k in this team. And being able to utilize vaporize is actually quite a big advantage, because as we know, HP damage dealers don't really have many buffs to choose from. For example, they can have the HP buff from Hydro Resonance, buffs and debuffs from Kazuha. You could also get extra resistance shred and damage buffs from Zhongli. Maybe Yelan's buffs, but there isn't really as much as an attack scaling character does. So this makes it a big strength that Furina is able to get that 2x multiplier for vaporizing some of her hits, mostly her crab letter, and it also allows Furina to scale from EM now too. So actually forward vape inherently unlocks quite a lot for HP scaling Hydro, and that was also one of the reasons why Neuvillette was really good in vaporized teams. Overall, in terms of calculations, one of the Klee theory crafters, CPM, has calculated that in an ideal setting, the overall damage of this new Klee Furina team is quite a sizable upgrade over Mono Pyro, which was already a strong team, and whilst just looking at calculations doesn't make it an objectively better team, and I wouldn't say it's always better in every situation too, especially if you haven't farmed the new set for Klee yet, you're missing out on around 17% damage just from that. But in many situations, this team can be stronger, and at the very least, seeing positive calculations is a good sign. In terms of speedrun scaling, as I'm sure you know, over the years, Klee Mono Pyro has always been reasonably popular and successful for low to mid-cost speedrunning. These are just some old examples here. But one of the big downsides was that the team scaling was basically finished after you got C2 on Klee, since Klee doesn't really have a better 5-star weapon than the Widsith, and this being a non-reaction team doesn't really benefit from Kazuha's C2. This means that this team was not popular at all for higher investment players, and if you were a higher investment player, you pretty much only just relegate Klee to a support. And in the comparison, even in the case of vertical investment, you can see that this new team has a lot more potential than Monopyro in regards to constellations and weapons. For example, with Furina, you can use the key, which is quite a strong damage increase for her. There's also her early constellations, which are big increases. Klee can now use the new Fontaine weapons, like Tome of the Eternal Flow, since her HP now increases and decreases. Furina also does benefit from both Klee's C1 and her C2. Her C1 does give a bit more consistent pyro application, being another very rare buff for Furina. Kazuha's C2 can also give a very big elemental mastery buff for Furina too. And overall, even if you're a person like me and you're not really interested in too much constellations and weapons, a team having growth potential like this, it generally does give it more longevity, and at least it's definitely an advantage compared to teams which peak very early and you can't really increase the ceilings much. So I'll just show you a setup example in the Abyss. This is great for a boss. Furina EQ, Bennett Q, Kazuha QE, boom, and then Klee. So how the double swirl buff works. So Furina is technically a bit different to a character like Child or Yelan setups, even though essentially the setups look the same. So Furina doesn't have a strong high gauge Hydra application like them. So after you use Bennett's Burst, with those characters, there's still a bit of Hydro left for Kazuha to swirl with. Whereas with Furina, her Hydra application is normal, so it's fully cleared with Bennett's Burst because that has strong pyro application. So actually, the Hydra application comes after with the pets auto attacking, and that's what Kazuha uses to double buff the team. And also I covered this concept in a Kazuha video a while ago, but because Furina applies the Hydra fresh, that means you can't use Kazuha's tap or his semi-hold, you've got to use the hold or Kazuha's burst in order to do a double buff setup properly. Also, if you're unsure whether to use Furina's skill then burst or her burst then her skill, generally speaking, using Furina's burst then skill, it lines up nicer if you're skipping Kazuha's burst. Like for example, if you want to do a really fast setup for a speedrun. But I would say for a casual run, you should just take the easy option and use Furina's skill then her burst into Kazuha's burst then his skill. And do that wherever possible in order to have the smoothest execution, as well as Kazuha's burst does have decent damage, so you are getting a slightly stronger damage window. And just like with a lot of other vaporize teams, you will often need a different setup for an AoE fight and a fight with multiple enemies. This is because Kazuha's swirl in AoE, it reapplies Hydra onto enemies again, meaning his plunge will vaporize and you won't get the pyro swirl to buff pyro after. So here's an example of an AoE setup. Then Furina's burst, then her skill, then that, and then Kazuha's hold E. You can see I managed to swirl both pyro and Hydra there. I'll show it again. Klee normal attack to Kazuha burst, then use Furina's burst. And skill Bennett, Kazuha hold. and you can see both elements are getting double buffed. You might also be worried that Bennett doesn't have enough healing because he doesn't have team-wide healing. And for example, if your entire team is stuck below 50%, that means Furina isn't draining HP, meaning her elemental skill is not doing as much damage. And in a vaporized team, that's a very big loss. And her burst is also not buffing the team as well, which also kind of creates a bad cycle because that reduces the healing bonus you get. The good thing though, in a team like this, Klee will be naturally healed because she is the on-field damage dealer, and Coswell will be naturally healed because he used his abilities under Bennett's burst. So the discussion really is just about keeping Bennett's HP up and keeping Furina's HP up. First of all, if your Bennett is well built, like for example, this is what I'm using right now, these are his stats, it is possible with a good build like this, he can fully heal Coswell and Klee on multiple occasions, even with just one tick. As we covered before, this activates Furina's team-wide healing. It isn't much, but this healing is enough to keep her dealing maximum damage, and it keeps her burst building stacks too, so it helps a lot. Second of all, you can use Bennett's skill after his burst and allowing him one tick to heal himself, as long as you time it correctly so you're still double swirling and double buffing the team. This can be worthwhile. And for Furina's HP, there's a few popular methods. One of them is doing a healing setup. And yes, this is unironically pretty popular in speedruns, meaning if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you, which is you switch her form, you do your setup, and then you switch back. I'll show you what it looks like. As you can see, it doesn't really take that much longer, but it does give herself about 2 ticks of healing, which can definitely be good enough to get you through a fight. You can also use the Maiden set on Bennett, which I covered in my previous video. As you know, it may not be the most optimal for damage, but increasing the strength of his healing, which can certainly be more comfortable to play. And I know some speedrunners who are even using this in their more casual runs. So that's it for today. I'll definitely be making a lot more videos about this team, but this video will have covered some basics. If you guys were interested in this team, I hope you found this video helpful and it made you interested in trying this team. So look forward to more videos, and thanks for watching.